The crystal chandeliers caught the light of 1,000 diamonds, scattering it across the ballroom like shattered stars. Each refraction seemed to mock me, reminding me that I was surrounded by wealth I'd never truly possess, acceptance I'd never earn, respect I'd never command. I stood at the edge of the marble dance floor, champagne flute clutched in my hand like a lifeline, and tried to make myself invisible. It never worked. "Oh, look," a voice drifted over my shoulder, pitched just loud enough for me to hear. Vincent brought his little mistake again. How charitable of him. I didn't turn around. I'd learned long ago that acknowledging them only made it worse. Instead, I took a small sip of champagne, focusing on the way the bubbles burned slightly against my tongue, the cool crystal of the glass against my palm, anything but the knot of humiliation tightening in my stomach. "I heard she actually thinks she belongs here," another woman replied, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "Poor thing. Someone should tell her that wearing a designer dress doesn't change what she is." What I was. The bastard daughter. The living, breathing reminder of Vincent Bennett's indiscretion 23 years ago. The stain he refused to hide, parading me through these events like some twisted declaration that he answered to no one, not even the unspoken rules about keeping your mistakes quiet. My mother had been a waitress at one of his clubs. Beautiful, young, and naive enough to believe a man like Vincent Bennett when he said he'd leave his wife. She'd died when I was 7, leaving me with nothing but her green eyes, her dark hair, and the dubious legacy of being Vincent's acknowledged but illegitimate child. "Chloe." My father's voice cut through my thoughts. I turned to find him approaching, his silver-streaked dark hair perfectly styled, his tuxedo immaculate. At 60, Vincent Bennett commanded every room he entered with the kind of power that made strong men nervous and weak men terrified. "Stop lurking in corners. You're a Bennett. Act like it." The irony wasn't lost on me. I was a Bennett when it suited him, when he wanted to prove a point or make a statement, but never quite Bennett enough to be introduced to his legitimate children as their sister. Never quite family enough to be welcomed at the Thanksgiving table with his wife and sons. "Yes, Father," I said quietly, straightening my spine despite the weight of hostile gazes pressing against me from every direction. He studied me for a moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Vincent had never been cruel to me, not exactly. He'd provided for me generously, paid for my education at the best schools, given me an allowance that most people would consider excessive. But there was a distance between us, a carefully maintained wall that reminded me I was his responsibility, not his daughter. Not really. "The Castellanos are here," he said, nodding toward a cluster of people near the bar. "Antonio wants to discuss the dock situation. Stay visible, but don't engage unless spoken to directly." Translation: stand there and look pretty, be seen as proof of his power to do whatever he wanted, but don't embarrass him by actually trying to participate in the world he'd forced me into. "Of course," I murmured. He walked away without another word, leaving me once again alone in a crowd of people who would never accept me. I moved toward one of the tall windows overlooking the city, needing the illusion of escape, even if actual escape was impossible. These events were mandatory for me, commanded performances where I played the role of the dutiful daughter, while everyone else played their roles too. The women scorning me, the men undressing me with their eyes, my father using me as a prop in whatever power game he was playing that week. Chloe Bennett. The voice was male, smooth, and far too close. I turned to find Marcus Delacroix standing beside me, his cologne expensive and overwhelming. He was the eldest son of the Delacroix family, married to a woman currently glaring daggers at me from across the room. "You look beautiful tonight. That dress is very flattering." His gaze traveled over me in a way that made my skin crawl, lingering on the neckline of my emerald green gown with undisguised hunger. This was the other side of my existence in this world. While the wives and legitimate daughters saw me as a threat to their social standing, their husbands and sons saw me as something else entirely. Available, accessible. A woman without protection or value beyond what she could provide in dark corners and hotel rooms. "Thank you, Mr. Delacroix," I said, my voice carefully neutral as I tried to step away. His hand caught my elbow, his grip just slightly too tight. "You know, a woman like you must get lonely. All dressed up with nowhere to go, no one to appreciate you properly." His thumb stroked the inside of my wrist, and my stomach turned. "I could appreciate you, Chloe. I could make you very comfortable." I yanked my arm away, my heart hammering. "I'm not interested. Don't be coy." His smile was predatory. "We both know what you are. Your father might dress you up and parade you around, but you're not one of us. You're not wife material, sweetheart. But you could be something else. Something much more. Enjoyable." Before I could respond, his wife appeared at his side, her expression venomous. "Marcus, darling, come dance with me." She didn't look at me, but her next words were clearly directed my way. "Some women have standards. They don't throw themselves at married men, hoping for scraps of attention." They walked away, leaving me shaking with a volatile mixture of anger, humiliation, and helplessness. This was my life, caught between women who hated me for existing and men who saw me as prey. No matter how carefully I dressed, how proper my behavior, how silent my presence, nothing changed. I was the stain, the mistake, the thing that didn't belong. The rest of the evening passed in familiar agony. I circulated through the ballroom, a ghost at my own father's event, ignored by some, scorned by others, propositioned by too many. By the time midnight approached, my face hurt from maintaining a neutral expression, and my feet ached in the Louboutins my father had sent over that morning. I was considering slipping out early, consequences be damned, when the room's energy shifted. Conversations faltered, heads turned, and a ripple of tension moved through the crowd like a physical force. He entered alone, which was unusual. Men like him always traveled with an entourage, a visible display of power and protection. But Dominic Russo walked into the Bennett charity ball as if he owned it, as if every person in the room existed solely for his amusement, and he might decide at any moment whether they were worth his attention. I'd never met him, but I knew who he was. Everyone in this world knew Dominic Russo. While families like the Bennetts and Delacroix had spent generations building their empires through strategic marriages and carefully cultivated legitimacy, the Russos had taken a different path. They were brutal, efficient, and terrifyingly effective. Dominic had inherited his family's operations 5 years ago, and had immediately set about expanding them with a ruthlessness that made even hardened criminals nervous. He was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 35, with dark hair that looked artfully disheveled and a face that could have belonged to a Renaissance statue, if not for the hardness in his eyes. Those eyes, cold and assessing, swept across the ballroom with the kind of attention that suggested he was cataloging every person, every exit, every potential threat. And then they landed on me. I froze, champagne glass halfway to my lips, as Dominic Russo's gaze locked onto mine across the crowded ballroom. For a moment that stretched into eternity, we simply stared at each other. I should have looked away, should have done anything other than meet the eyes of the most dangerous man in the room, but I couldn't move. His expression was unreadable, but something flickered in those dark eyes. Recognition? Interest? I couldn't tell, and the uncertainty made my pulse race with a mixture of fear and something else I didn't want to examine too closely. He started moving through the crowd, and panic spiked through me. He was coming toward me. Why was he coming toward me? I glanced around desperately, looking for my father, for anyone who might intercede, but Vincent was deep in conversation with the Castellanos, and no one else was paying attention to me. They never did. Until it was too late. Miss Bennet. His voice was deep, controlled, with an edge that suggested violence was always an option, just carefully leashed. He stopped directly in front of me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive like cedar and smoke. We haven't been formally introduced. I'm Dominic Russo. I know who you are, I said, then immediately regretted how breathless I sounded. His lips curved into something that might have been a smile if it had reached his eyes. Of course you do. Just as I know who you are. Chloe Bennet, Vincent's beautiful daughter who isn't quite a Bennet at all. The casual cruelty of the statement should have hurt, but coming from him, it sounded different. Not mocking, but observant, as if he was simply stating a fact about the world we both inhabited. What do you want, Mr. Russo? I asked, lifting my chin despite the way my heart was hammering. Dance with me. It wasn't a request. The words were delivered with the same casual command he might use to order an execution, and the room seemed to collectively hold its breath. Dancing with Dominic Russo would be making a statement. Aligning myself publicly with a man my father viewed as a rival, possibly an enemy. I don't think that's a good idea, I said carefully. I don't recall asking if you thought it was a good idea. He extended his hand, and I noticed for the first time that his knuckles were scarred, evidence of violence done personally rather than delegated. Dance with me, Chloe Bennet. Unless you'd prefer to spend the rest of the evening being propositioned by married men and insulted by their wives. The accuracy of his observation stole my breath. How long had he been watching me? How much had he seen? Before I could respond, I felt, rather than saw, the circle of hostile attention that had formed around us. Wives who'd spent the evening cutting me with words now watched with barely concealed fury, their husbands' faces contorted with impotent rage. And in the center of it all stood Dominic Russo, his hand still extended, waiting for my answer with the patience of a predator who knew his prey had nowhere to run. I placed my hand in his fingers closed around mine with possession that felt both protective and dangerous, and he led me onto the dance floor with fluid grace. The orchestra, as if on cue, began playing a waltz, and Dominic pulled me into his arms with a familiarity that suggested he knew exactly how bodies fit together, exactly where to place his hands for maximum control. You're trembling, he observed as we began to move. You're terrifying, I replied honestly. That earned me a genuine smile, the first one I'd seen from him, and it transformed his face entirely. Good. You should be terrified. But not of me, Chloe. Never of me. I didn't understand what he meant. But before I could ask, his attention shifted to something over my shoulder, and his expression went cold. I glanced back and saw Marcus Delacroix watching us, his face flushed with what might have been anger or arousal or both. That one, Dominic said quietly, his voice pitched only for me. He propositioned you earlier, didn't he? Suggested you could be comfortable if you were willing to spread your legs for a married man who sees you as nothing more than convenient pussy. The crude language should have shocked me, but I found myself nodding. How did you know? I've been watching you for months, Chloe Bennet. His hand tightened on my waist, pulling me infinitesimally closer. I've seen how they treat you. The women who fear you'll corrupt their perfect lives. The men who think you're fair game because your father won't protect you. I've watched you endure it with dignity that would shame queens. Why? The question escaped before I could stop it. Why watch me? Why care how they treat me? He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, as the waltz brought us into a turn that placed us at the center of the floor, every eye in the room fixed on us, he spoke. Because you're mine. The words hung between us like a declaration of war. Mine. As if I were property to be claimed, a possession to be acquired. I should have been furious, should have pulled away from him and slapped his arrogant face in front of everyone. But the certainty in his voice, the absolute conviction, did something strange to me. It didn't feel like objectification. It felt like protection. "I'm not anyone's," I managed to say, though my voice lacked conviction. "You've been mine since the moment I saw you at the Castellano wedding 6 months ago," he continued, guiding me through the waltz with expert precision. "Standing alone on that terrace, watching the fireworks with an expression that said you'd rather be anywhere else. You looked so beautifully out of place, like a dove among vultures." My breath caught. I remembered that night. I'd escaped to the terrace to avoid yet another married man's wandering hands, seeking a few moments of peace before my father noticed my absence and dragged me back inside. "You were there?" I asked. "I'm always there, Chloe. Watching. Waiting." His dark eyes held mine, intense and unwavering. "I've watched Marcus Delacroix and a dozen men like him proposition you. I've watched their wives tear you apart with words while their husbands undressed you with their eyes. I've watched your father parade you through these events like a trophy he's too ashamed to actually claim." Each word landed like a blow, accurate and painful. "Then you've watched me survive it," I said, finding a shred of defiance. "I don't need you to rescue me." "No," he agreed, and something like respect flickered across his face. "You don't need rescuing. You're far stronger than any of these pathetic people realize, but that doesn't mean you should have to endure their poison alone." The waltz ended, but Dominic didn't release me. Instead, he kept his hand firmly on my waist, his other hand still clasping mine, as if daring anyone to suggest he should let go. The orchestra began another piece, and we continued dancing while around us. Couples awkwardly rejoined or fled the floor entirely. "Your father is watching," Dominic murmured. "He looks displeased." I risked a glance and saw Vincent's face, tight with controlled anger. Beside him, Antonio Castellano was whispering something, his expression calculating. This was bad. By dancing with me, by claiming me so publicly, Dominic was making a statement that would have consequences far beyond this ballroom. "You should go," I said urgently, "before this becomes something bigger than it needs to be. It's already bigger than you realize." His hand tightened on my waist. "I didn't come here tonight for the charity auction or the networking opportunities. I came for you." My heart stuttered. "What?" "Your father has been trying to negotiate with me for months," Dominic explained, his voice low and intimate, despite the dozens of people watching us. "He wants access to my distribution networks, my connections in Europe. He's offered money, territory, alliances with other families. Everything except the one thing I actually want, which is you." The single word sent heat flooding through me, followed immediately by cold reality. "I'm not his to give. He doesn't control me." "Doesn't he?" Dominic challenged. "You're here tonight because he commanded it. You've attended 100 events like this one because he demanded it. You've endured humiliation and degradation because he chose to acknowledge you just enough to make you a target, but not enough to actually protect you." Everything he said was true, and the truth of it burned like acid. Vincent had given me money, education, access to a world I could never truly be part of. But he'd never given me protection. Never stood up for me when the wives sneered or the husbands leered. Never claimed me as his daughter in any way that mattered. "What are you proposing?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Dominic's smile was slow and dangerous. "A trade. You, in exchange for everything your father wants from me. My networks, my connections, my support for his expansion into the European markets." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. "You want to buy me from him?" "I want to give you a choice," he corrected. "Vincent will never agree to simply let you go. His pride won't allow it. And strategically, having a connection to me through you is valuable. But if you agree to become mine willingly, if you choose me, then the negotiation becomes about formalizing something that already exists, rather than trying to force something you don't want. This is insane, I breathed. You don't even know me. I know you better than you think. His thumb traced a small circle on my waist, the touch sending shivers down my spine. I know you graduated top of your class from Columbia, but work as a freelance translator because your father won't acknowledge you enough to give you a real position in his organization. I know you live in a modest apartment in Brooklyn, even though you could afford something much nicer, because you don't want to depend entirely on his money. I know you volunteer at a women's shelter on Tuesdays and Thursdays, helping women escape situations not unlike the one you're trapped in. Each revelation made my pulse race faster. The depth of his knowledge about me should have been frightening, but instead it felt like being seen. Really seen, for the first time in my life. You've been stalking me, I accused. I've been learning about the woman I intend to make my wife, he corrected, and the casual way he said wife made my breath catch. There's a difference. Wife? The word came out as barely a whisper. Did you think I'd proposition you like those married bastards who see you as nothing more than a mistress? His expression hardened. I don't do things halfway, Chloe. When I claim something, I claim it completely. Legally, publicly, permanently. The music swelled around us, and I realized we'd been dancing for 3 songs now. An eternity in this world where appearances and propriety mattered more than anything else. People were definitely talking, and my father's expression had progressed from displeased to furious. He'll never agree, I said. Vincent might want your networks, but he won't let you have me. It would look like weakness, like you'd gotten the better end of the deal. Then we'll have to convince him otherwise. Dominic's voice dropped even lower, his lips close enough to my ear that his breath tickled my skin. Starting with making sure everyone in this room understands that you're already mine, whether the paperwork has been filed or not. Before I could ask what he meant, he spun me out and then pulled me back in, but this time he didn't stop at the appropriate distance. He pulled me flush against him, one hand sliding from my waist to the small of my back, pressing me intimately close while his other hand released mine to cup my face. What are you doing? I gasped, staking my claim. And then his mouth was on mine. The kiss was possession and promise and threat all at once. His lips moved against mine with expert precision, coaxing a response I shouldn't give, not here, not in front of everyone. But my body had other ideas, melting against him despite my brain screaming that this was wrong, was dangerous, was going to have consequences I couldn't begin to imagine. Around us, I heard gasps, shocked whispers, the scandalized murmurs of a society that lived by unspoken rules Dominic had just shattered. He kissed me like he owned me, like he had every right to my mouth and my body and my future. And God help me, I kissed him back. When he finally pulled away, his dark eyes glittered with satisfaction. Now everyone knows. I opened my mouth to respond, but Vincent's voice cut through the moment like a knife. Russo. My father's tone could have frozen fire. A word. Now. Dominic's hand remained possessively on my waist as he turned to face Vincent. Of course, but Chloe comes with me. We discuss this together, or we don't discuss it at all. Vincent's jaw tightened, but after a moment, he nodded curtly. My office. 5 minutes. As my father stalked away, I became aware of the stares, the whispers, the speculation rippling through the ballroom. Marcus Delacroix looked like he wanted to murder someone. His wife looked like she'd swallowed poison. And a dozen other faces reflected variations of shock, calculation, and barely concealed fury. What have you done? I asked Dominic, my voice shaking. He smiled, and it was the smile of a man who'd just won a war. I've claimed you publicly. Now no one will dare touch you without going through me first. You've made me a target. No, he corrected, his hand tightening on my waist. I've made you untouchable. There's a difference. He led me through the crowd, which parted before us like water before a shark. I caught glimpses of faces as we passed, reading a dozen different emotions, but landing most frequently on fear. They were afraid of Dominic Russo, afraid of what his interest in me meant, afraid of how the balance of power had just shifted in ways they couldn't yet calculate. Vincent's office was on the second floor, a sanctuary of dark wood and expensive leather that reflected his taste for traditional displays of power. He was already there when we arrived, standing behind his desk with his hands braced on the mahogany surface, his expression thunderous. "Have you lost your mind?" he demanded the moment the door closed behind us. Kissing her in the middle of my charity ball, in front of every family in the city. "I was making a statement," Dominic replied calmly, guiding me to one of the leather chairs before taking a position beside me, standing close enough that the message was clear. "We're together." One that I thought would clarify our ongoing negotiations. Clarify? Vincent's laugh was bitter. "You've complicated everything. The Delacroix are furious. Marcus has been pursuing Chloe for months, and you just publicly humiliated him." "Marcus Delacroix has been sexually harassing your daughter for months," Dominic corrected, his voice going cold. "And you've done nothing to stop it because you don't actually see her as your daughter. You see her as a convenient prop in your power games." Vincent's face flushed with anger. "How I treat my family is none of your concern." It became my concern the moment I decided Chloe would be my wife. The word wife hung in the air like a bomb. Vincent stared at Dominic, then at me, then back at Dominic, his expression cycling through disbelief, calculation, and finally, reluctant interest. "You want to marry her?" he said slowly. "I do. In exchange, you get everything you've been asking for. My European networks, my distribution channels, my support for your expansion. Full alliance between the Russo and Bennett families, sealed by marriage." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his eyes narrowing as he processed the offer. I could practically see him calculating the benefits, weighing the political implications, considering how this would position him against his rivals. "And what does Chloe get out of this arrangement?" he asked, surprising me by actually considering my interests. "Protection," Dominic said immediately. "Respect, a position in society that can't be questioned. Everything she should have had from you but never did." The barb landed, and Vincent's jaw tightened. But he didn't argue, because we all knew it was true. "Chloe," my father said, addressing me directly for the first time since we'd entered the office. "Do you want this?" Did I? I'd known Dominic Russo for less than an hour. He'd declared me his without asking, kissed me in front of hundreds of people, and was now negotiating for me like I was territory to be acquired. Every rational part of me screamed that this was wrong, was dangerous, was a trap I'd never escape from. But then I thought about what my life had been. Years of humiliation, of being neither fully accepted nor completely rejected, of watching married men proposition me while their wives scorned me, of standing alone at events like tonight with no protection and no escape. Dominic Russo was offering me something different, something that terrified me and tempted me in equal measure. I looked up at him, at this dangerous man who claimed to have been watching me for months, and saw something in his dark eyes that I'd never seen directed at me before. Not lust, though that was there too. Not calculation, though he was clearly strategic. But something else. Something that looked almost like reverence. "Yes," I heard myself say. "I want this." The engagement was announced the next morning in every major newspaper and online outlet that mattered. Russo-Bennett alliance sealed through marriage. The headlines proclaimed, accompanied by photos from the ball showing Dominic kissing me in the middle of the dance floor. I looked dazed in the pictures, overwhelmed, like a woman who'd just had her entire life rearranged without permission. Which, I supposed, I had. I was still in my Brooklyn apartment when my phone started ringing. The first call was from a number I didn't recognize. Then another, and another. By the time the sun was fully up, I had 23 missed calls and a text message from my father. "Pack your things. You're moving to Russo's estate today. Send me your address, and I'll have your belongings collected." Not a question, not a discussion. Just another command in a lifetime of commands. I was still staring at the message when there was a knock at my door. Through the peephole, I saw a man I didn't recognize, tall and broad-shouldered in an expensive suit that screamed private security. "Miss Bennett?" He called through the door. "I'm Marco, Mr. Russo's head of security. He sent me to ensure your safety and assist with your move." Of course he did. I opened the door to find not just Marco but 2 other men, similarly dressed and obviously armed based on the way their jackets hung. "Mr. Russo wants you moved to his estate by noon," Marco explained, his tone professional, but leaving no room for argument. "We're here to help pack and provide security during the transition." "I haven't agreed to move in with him," I protested weakly. Marco's expression didn't change. "With respect, Miss Bennett, you agreed to become his wife last night. In Mr. Russo's world, that means you're already his to protect, and he can't protect you adequately when you're living alone in an apartment building with minimal security." He wasn't wrong. My building had a front door that buzzed people in, and absolutely nothing else in terms of security. If any of the families who saw me as a threat or an opportunity wanted to reach me, they could do so easily. "Fine," I conceded, moving aside to let them in. "But I pack my own personal items." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Marco's team efficiently boxed my books, kitchen items, and furniture, while I packed clothing, toiletries, and the few things that mattered to me personally. My mother's jewelry box, the photograph of us from my 7th birthday, the last one before she died, my journals, filled with years of thoughts I'd never shared with anyone. By 11 o'clock, everything was loaded into 2 black SUVs, and I was being driven through the city toward an address in the countryside that I'd only seen in magazines. The Russo estate sprawled across 200 acres north of the city, surrounded by walls and security that made it more fortress than home. The main house came into view as we drove through the gates, and my breath caught. It was beautiful in a severe way, all stone and glass and modern architecture that spoke of wealth without ostentation. Unlike the ornate mansions favored by families like the Bennetts, this was sleek, powerful, uncompromising, like the man who owned it. Dominic was waiting on the front steps, dressed casually in dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms. He looked different from last night. Less severe, though no less intimidating. "Chloe," he said, as Marco opened my door. "Welcome home." Home. The word felt foreign on his lips, but the way he looked at me, with that same intensity from the ball, made something warm unfurl in my chest. "This is happening very fast," I said, accepting his offered hand, and trying to ignore the way electricity seemed to jump between our palms. "It needs to." He guided me up the steps and into an enormous foyer that managed to feel both grand and welcoming. "After last night, you're not safe in an unprotected location. There are already 3 families trying to decide if you're an asset to acquire or a liability to eliminate." The casual way he mentioned my potential elimination made my blood run cold. "You could have warned me before kissing me in front of everyone. Would you have let me if I had?" His smile was knowing. He was right. If he'd laid out the full consequences beforehand, I probably would have run. But he'd acted decisively, forcing my hand in his, creating a situation where the only path forward was together. "Let me show you the house," he said, his hand settling on the small of my back in a gesture that was becoming familiar. Possessive but not controlling, claiming but not confining. The tour revealed a space that was far more lived in than I'd expected. Yes, There was wealth evident in every custom detail, every piece of original artwork. But there were also books left open on tables, a kitchen that clearly saw regular use, rooms that felt like they'd been designed for comfort rather than display. "This will be your space," Dominic said, opening a door to reveal a stunning suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the grounds. "Your office is through there, bedroom here, bathroom there. I've had your things brought up already." I stepped inside, overwhelmed by the sheer size of it. My entire Brooklyn apartment could have fit in just the bedroom portion. "Where's your room?" Across the hall, his voice was neutral, carefully so. "I assumed you'd want your own space, at least initially. When you're ready to share a room, you need only say so." The implication sent heat flooding through me. We were engaged, would be married soon, and eventually we'd share more than just a house. But he was giving me time to adjust, to come to terms with how drastically my life had changed. "Thank you," I said softly. He moved closer, his hand coming up to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. "I know this isn't how most people get engaged. I know I didn't court you properly, didn't give you time to decide if you actually wanted me. But I meant what I said last night, Chloe. You're mine now. And I protect what's mine." "Why me?" The question had been burning in me since last night. "You could have any woman you wanted. Why choose your rival's bastard daughter?" Something flickered in his dark eyes. "Come with me. There's something I want to show you." He led me back downstairs and through a series of hallways to a room I hadn't seen on the tour. When he opened the door, I gasped. It was an office, but the walls were covered with photographs. Not artwork, but actual photographs of me. At the Castellano wedding, standing on that terrace. At a coffee shop near my apartment, reading a book. Walking into the women's shelter where I volunteered. Attending a dozen different events with my father over the past 6 months. This is... I couldn't find words. "Obsessive?" he supplied. "Probably. But I told you. I've been watching you. What I didn't tell you was why." He moved to stand beside one particular photograph, taken at some outdoor event I barely remembered. In it, I was smiling at something off camera, and my face was lit with genuine joy, so rare in these situations that it transformed me completely. "I saw you at the Castellano wedding," Dominic began, his voice quieter than I'd heard it. "You were everything I'd been told Vincent Bennett's bastard would be. Beautiful, isolated, existing on the margins of a world that wouldn't fully accept you. I expected to feel contempt or pity. Instead, I felt recognition." He turned to face me fully. My mother was the daughter of a grocery store owner. She met my father when she was working as a translator for one of his business meetings. He fell in love with her, married her despite every other family saying it was beneath him. She was never accepted by the wives of the other bosses. They treated her like a curiosity at best, an embarrassment at worst. It destroyed her slowly, that isolation, that constant rejection. My breath caught. "What happened to her?" "She died when I was 12, he said flatly. "Officially, it was a heart attack. Unofficially, it was loneliness, depression, the cumulative effect of years being treated as less than human by people who thought their bloodlines made them superior." "I'm sorry," I whispered. I watched my father retreat into his work after she died. He'd loved her desperately, but he'd never protected her from them. Never made them accept her. Never used his power to shield her from their cruelty. He let the woman he loved be destroyed, because he cared too much about maintaining relationships with families who saw her as beneath them. Dominic stepped closer, his hand cupping my face with surprising gentleness. "When I saw you on that terrace, I saw my mother. Alone at an event surrounded by people, maintaining dignity despite the poison being directed at you. And I swore I would never be like my father. I would never stand by and watch someone. He paused, then continued. Someone important to me be destroyed by these vultures. You don't even know me, I protested, though my voice was weak. I know enough. His thumb stroked my cheekbone. I know you're strong enough to endure years of humiliation without becoming bitter. I know you're kind enough to volunteer at a shelter helping women escape abuse even though no one's ever protected you from it. I know you're brilliant enough to have graduated at the top of your class despite having no family support system. And I know that when I kissed you last night, you kissed me back like you'd been waiting for it as long as I had. He was right about that last part. The kiss had awakened something in me I'd thought long dead. A hunger for connection, for being wanted not despite what I was, but because of it. What happens now? I asked. Now we prepare for war, he said simply. Because making you mine has upset the delicate balance of power in this city. The families who saw you as available for their sons or as a useful pawn in negotiations with your father, they're going to push back. Some will try to break our engagement. Others will try to eliminate you as a threat. All of them will be watching, waiting for us to show weakness. How do we fight them? His smile was sharp and dangerous. By becoming exactly what they fear. By making you not just my fiancé, but my partner. By giving you the tools and power to stand as my equal. To command respect not through family bloodlines, but through your own strength. He moved to a desk and pulled out a folder, handing it to me. Inside is information on every major family in the city. Their businesses, both legitimate and otherwise. Their alliances, their weaknesses, their secrets. Starting tomorrow, you're going to learn everything about the world you're entering, and then you're going to help me reshape it. I opened the folder, scanning pages dense with information that would take days to fully process. Why give this to me? Why not just keep me as a trophy wife like everyone expects? Because I don't want a trophy, Dominic said, his voice intense. I want a queen. Someone who can stand beside me, who understands the game we're playing and how to win it. Someone who can protect herself when I'm not there and can protect others when I am. His words awakened something in me that had been dormant for years. Not just the desire to survive in this world, but the desire to master it, to take all the pain and humiliation I'd endured and transform it into power. When do we start? I asked. His smile was approving. Right now. We spent the rest of the day in his office, Dominic walking me through the complex web of relationships that governed organized crime in the city. He explained how the families were connected through marriages, business arrangements, and carefully balanced territories. He showed me where the weaknesses were, which alliances were genuine, and which were marriages of convenience waiting to fracture. Your father is overextended, he said, pointing to a chart that mapped out Vincent's various operations. He's been expanding aggressively for the past 2 years, trying to match the Castellanos and the Russos in scope. But he's spread thin. 3 of his businesses are barely profitable, 2 are actively losing money, and he's borrowed heavily to finance it all. And you know this because? Because I hold some of his debt, Dominic said with a slight smile. Not enough to control him, but enough to have leverage, which is why he agreed to our marriage so quickly. He needs my support to avoid a liquidity crisis. The revelation was startling. So he sold me to solve his financial problems. He made a strategic alliance that benefits both families, Dominic corrected. Though yes, his motivations were primarily financial. Mine, however, were not. I studied the charts, seeing my father's empire with new eyes. The Delacroix family has been courting him for months. They want to merge operations. Yes, Marcus Delacroix specifically has been pushing for it. And part of that push involved positioning himself as a potential husband for you, creating a family connection that would make the merger smoother. My stomach turned. That's why he's been pursuing me. That's why Vincent never stopped him. Dominic said darkly. He was keeping the option open in case my negotiations fell through. You were a bargaining chip, Chloe. One he was willing to trade to the highest bidder. Anger burned through me, hot and purifying. What can I do about it? You can become valuable in your own right, Dominic said. Not as Vincent Bennett's daughter or Dominic Russo's wife, but as yourself. You speak 6 languages fluently, correct? I nodded, surprised he knew that. 3 of those languages are critical for international negotiations. Starting next week, you'll begin accompanying me to meetings, serving as a translator and observer. You'll learn how deals are made, how power is negotiated, how to read people's intentions beneath their words. The prospect was both terrifying and exhilarating. Won't the other families object? Women don't typically participate in business meetings. Then we'll be changing tradition. His voice was firm. Besides, they'll underestimate you because you're a woman, because you're Vincent's bastard, because you're young. That's an advantage. Let them think you're decorative while you're actually learning how to dismantle them. We worked until well past midnight, Dominic patiently explaining the intricate power dynamics while I absorbed information like a sponge desperate for water. When my eyes finally began to droop with exhaustion, he called for dinner to be brought to the office, and we ate while continuing to discuss strategy. You should rest, he said eventually, noticing me stifling a yawn. Tomorrow we have meetings with 3 families who want to express concerns about our engagement. It will be a long day. I stood, my body stiff from hours of sitting, and found Dominic had risen as well, moving around the desk to stand close to me. Thank you, I said softly. For this. For giving me tools instead of just protection. You deserve both. His hand came up to cup my face, and I found myself leaning into the touch. Sleep well, Chloe, and dream of the empire we're going to build together. He kissed me then, gentle and promising. A stark contrast to the claiming kiss from the ball. This was different, intimate, like a secret shared between us in the quiet darkness of his office. When he pulled away, I felt the loss of his warmth acutely. Good night, Dominic, I whispered. Good night, my queen. Word count, 348 words. I'll continue with parts 4, 5, and 6. Continue our 21 to 32. Orchestrated narrative continuation with precise word count parameters. The user wants me to continue with parts 4, 5, and 6. I need to maintain the word count requirements. Part 4. Minimum 1230 words. Maximum 1300 words. Part 5. Minimum 1200 words. Maximum 1300 words. Part 6. Minimum 1200 words. Maximum 1350 words. I need to continue the story following the narrative arc. Part 4. The negotiation. Conflicts with other families. Deeper revelation of threats. Showing Chloe gaining power through influence. Part 5. The web closes. Complications, deepening relationship. Chloe using her newfound knowledge. Part 6. The point of no return. Climax, threat to Chloe, demonstration of Dominic's power, her choice to stay, new reality. I need to maintain the tension, develop the romance authentically, include intrigue and betrayals as requested, and build to a satisfying conclusion where Chloe embraces her role as queen beside Dominic. The first meeting was with the Castellano family at 10 the next morning. Antonio Castellano arrived with his wife Teresa and their eldest son Roberto, all 3 wearing expressions that ranged from curious to openly hostile. I sat beside Dominic in his office, positioned not behind him like a secretary, but at his right hand, like a partner. The message was clear, and from the tightening of Antonio's jaw, it was received. Russo, Antonio began, dispensing with pleasantries. This engagement has created complications. Has it? Dominic's tone was mild, but I could feel the tension in his body. I wasn't aware that my personal life required your approval. When your personal life involves Vincent Bennett's daughter, and potentially shifts the balance of power in this city. It becomes everyone's concern. Antonio's eyes flicked to me dismissively. No offense, Miss Bennet. None taken, I said coolly. Though I should mention its future Mrs. Russo now. Teresa Castellano's expression soured. How progressive. Dominic, surely you can see how this appears. The bastard daughter, suddenly elevated to your wife? It reeks of desperation or strategy, and neither reflects well on you. Then it's fortunate I don't particularly care how it reflects, Dominic replied. Chloe and I are engaged. The wedding will take place in 6 weeks. You're welcome to attend or not, but the outcome remains the same. Roberto leaned forward, his eyes on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. 6 weeks is very fast. One might wonder if there's a reason for the rush. The implication was clear and disgusting. Before Dominic could respond, I did. One might wonder, I said, meeting Roberto's gaze steadily, why you're so interested in my reproductive status. Is it curiosity, or are you upset that Dominic claimed me before you could proposition me at the next charity event? The room went silent. Roberto's face flushed red, and Antonio's eyebrows rose in surprise. Teresa looked like she'd swallowed something bitter. Chloe speaks 6 languages fluently, Dominic said into the silence, his hand finding mine under the table and squeezing approvingly, including Italian, Portuguese, and Mandarin. She'll be accompanying me to international negotiations from now on, serving as translator and advisor. Advisor? Antonio's tone was incredulous. She's barely been in this world for more than a few days, as anything other than Vincent's embarrassment. Which means she sees it with fresh eyes, Dominic countered, unclouded by decades of tradition and outdated thinking. Already she's identified 3 weaknesses in our current approach to the European markets that we've all been too blind to see. It was true. Last night, while studying his business dealings, I'd noticed patterns that didn't make sense, inefficiencies that suggested someone was either incompetent or deliberately sabotaging operations. I'd pointed them out to Dominic, who'd looked at me with a mixture of surprise and admiration. This is ridiculous, Teresa said. A woman, especially one with her background, has no place in our business discussions. Then perhaps, I said quietly, you should reconsider which businesses you're involved in. Because the world is changing, Mrs. Castellano. And families that cling to old prejudices are going to find themselves obsolete. Dominic's fingers tightened on mine, and I couldn't tell if it was warning or encouragement. Probably both. Antonio stood, signaling the meeting's end. You're making a mistake, Russo. This girl will be your downfall. On the contrary, Dominic rose as well, pulling me up with him. She'll be my greatest asset, but I appreciate your concern. After the Castellanos left, Dominic pulled me into his arms, his laugh rumbling through his chest. You magnificent creature. Did you see Antonio's face when you mentioned the European markets? I was terrified, I admitted, my heart still racing. You were perfect. He pressed a kiss to my forehead. And you were right about Roberto. He had planned to proposition you at the next event. I have 3 sources confirming it. The thought made my stomach turn. How many men were circling me like that? More than I'd like to count. His expression darkened. But they're all backing off now. Word is spreading that touching you means going through me, and no one wants that war. The next meeting was worse. Marcus Delacroix arrived alone, his expression barely concealing his rage. You stole what was mine, he said without preamble, not even sitting down. I was never yours, I replied before Dominic could speak. I was never anyone's property to be stolen. Your father and I had an understanding, Marcus continued as if I hadn't spoken. You were to marry me, creating an alliance between our families. The contracts were nearly finalized. My blood ran cold. What contracts? You didn't know? Marcus's smile was cruel. Vincent agreed to the marriage 3 months ago. Pending only my finalizing the business arrangements, you were to become my wife. I looked at Dominic, whose expression had gone dangerously still. Is this true? It's true that Vincent and Delacroix discussed it, Dominic said carefully. But no contracts were signed, and more importantly, you were never consulted. She's his daughter, Marcus spat. He has the right to arrange her marriage. Actually, I said, my voice shaking with fury, he doesn't. I'm 23 years old, legally an adult, and I have never agreed to marry you. Whatever understanding you thought you had with my father is void. Marcus's face contorted with rage. You little bitch. You think Russo actually wants you? He's using you to get to your father's European connections. Once he has what he needs, you'll be discarded just like every other bastard who got too comfortable. Dominic moved so fast I barely saw it. One moment he was seated beside me, the next he had Marcus pinned against the wall, his forearm pressed against the other man's throat. You will apologize to my fiancé, Dominic said, his voice deadly calm, or I will ensure you spend the rest of your very short life regretting those words. Dominic, I said, standing but not approaching. Something in me understood that this was a moment where he needed to defend me, needed to make this statement. Let him go. Not until he apologizes. Marcus's face was turning red from the pressure on his throat, but his eyes burned with hatred. I'm sorry, he choked out. My apologies, Miss Bennett. Dominic released him, and Marcus stumbled, gasping for air. Get out, Dominic ordered. And tell your father that any future communications regarding Chloe should go through me. She's mine to protect now, and anyone who threatens her threatens me. After Marcus left, I found myself shaking, the adrenaline catching up with me. Dominic was there immediately, his arms around me, his warmth steadying. He's lying, he murmured against my hair. I'm not using you. I don't need your father's connections badly enough to marry someone I didn't want. I know, I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. In the short time I'd known Dominic, he'd been ruthless, possessive, overwhelming, but never dishonest. He told me exactly what he wanted and why, without pretty lies or manipulation. Your father, however, Dominic continued, his voice hardening, has some explaining to do. He was negotiating your marriage without your knowledge or consent. The betrayal cut deep, though it shouldn't have surprised me. Vincent had never treated me as a daughter with agency, always as a resource to be deployed strategically. I need to confront him, I said. We'll confront him together. Dominic's hand cupped my face, tilting it up so I had to meet his eyes. You're not alone anymore, Chloe. Whatever battles you fight, I fight them with you. We drove to my father's office in the city, Dominic's hand never leaving mine. Marco drove while 2 other security personnel followed in a second vehicle. The show of force wasn't lost on me. This wasn't just a family visit, it was a statement. Vincent was in a meeting when we arrived, but his secretary took one look at Dominic's face and immediately interrupted. What the hell were you thinking? I demanded the moment we entered his office, not giving my father a chance to speak first. Arranging my marriage to Marcus Delacroix without even telling me? Vincent's expression cycled through surprise, calculation, and finally resignation. It was good strategy. The Delacroix family has resources we need. I'm not a resource. My voice rose despite my attempts to control it. I'm your daughter. You're a Bennett, Vincent corrected coldly. That means you serve the family's interests. She's a Russo now, Dominic interrupted, his voice like ice. Or will be in 6 weeks, and Russos protect their own, Vincent, something you clearly never learned. Don't lecture me about family, Vincent snapped. You've known her for less than a week. And in that week, I've given her more consideration and respect than you have in 23 years, Dominic shot back. She's not a bargaining chip. She's not a consolation prize for Marcus Delacroix's bruised ego. She's brilliant, capable, and worthy of being valued for who she is, not what she can provide through marriage. Something flickered in Vincent's eyes. Not quite shame, but close. The arrangement with Delacroix is void now anyway. Your engagement announcement killed that deal. Good, I said flatly. And for the record, I'm done being paraded at your events. If you want me there, you ask politely and respect my decision if I decline. I'm not your prop anymore. You're still my daughter, Vincent said. And for the first time, there was something almost like hurt in his voice. Then act like I'm your daughter, I challenged. Not your bastard, not your embarrassment, not your strategic asset. Your daughter. The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of unspoken pain and resentment. Finally, Vincent nodded slowly. You're right, he said quietly. I've treated you poorly. Used you without considering what you might want. I told myself it was business, that personal feelings had no place in our world. But watching you with Russo, seeing you stand up for yourself, it reminded me of your mother. She had that same fire. The mention of my mother made my throat tight. She would have hated how you treated me. Yes, Vincent agreed. She would have. And I'm sorry, Chloe. Truly sorry. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a beginning. The wedding is in 6 weeks, I said. You're invited, as my father. Not as Vincent Bennett, the crime boss, but as my father. If you can manage that distinction. I'll be there, he promised. As we left his office, Dominic's arm wrapped protectively around my waist. I felt something shift inside me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't caught between two worlds, desperately trying to belong to one, while being rejected by both. I was creating my own world, with my own rules, beside a man who saw me as an equal rather than an asset. That was brave, Dominic murmured as we reached the car. That was terrifying, I corrected, but necessary. My queen, he said, and this time the words felt earned rather than given. The next 4 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation, education, and transformation. Dominic kept his word about making me his partner, bringing me to meetings where I translated negotiations with European contacts and observed how power was wielded in rooms where decisions worth millions were made with handshakes and subtle threats. I learned quickly how to read body language across cultural barriers, how to identify when someone was lying in a language I barely spoke, how to position myself in a room so I appeared non-threatening while actually controlling the conversation's flow. The other families watched with varying degrees of skepticism and concern as I became more visible at Dominic's side. Some dismissed me as a novelty that would fade. Others recognized the threat I represented, a crack in the traditional order where women were decorative rather than functional. It was the women who surprised me most. I'd expected continued hostility from the wives and daughters who'd spent years scorning me. Instead, some began approaching me quietly, cautiously, asking questions about how I'd convinced Dominic to treat me as an equal. I didn't convince him, I told Gabriella Russo, Dominic's cousin's wife, during a rare moment alone at a family dinner. He chose to see me that way. Then you're luckier than most of us, she said softly. My husband loves me, but he'd never dream of including me in business discussions. Says it's too dangerous, that he's protecting me by keeping me ignorant. I heard the frustration beneath her words, the intelligence being wasted because tradition said women should be sheltered rather than empowered. What if we changed that? I asked, an idea forming. Over the next weeks, I quietly began building something unprecedented, a network of the wives and daughters, sharing information they gathered from their husbands' unguarded moments, teaching them to translate their observations into actionable intelligence. Dominic noticed, of course. He noticed everything. "You're recruiting," he said one night as we reviewed documents in his office, our nightly routine that had become my favorite part of each day. "I'm empowering," I corrected. "These women hear everything, see everything, but they're dismissed as decorative. Imagine what we could accomplish if we actually listened to them." His smile was slow and appreciative. "You're going to reshape this entire world, aren't you?" "We're going to reshape it," I corrected. "Together." He pulled me into his lap then, his arms wrapping around me as his lips found mine. These moments of intimacy had become more frequent as the wedding approached, though Dominic still maintained separate bedrooms, still gave me space to adjust to the enormity of what we were building. But the restraint was wearing thin for both of us. I could feel it in the way his hands lingered on my waist, the way his kisses grew deeper and more demanding, the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching. "3 more weeks," he murmured against my neck, his teeth grazing sensitive skin. "3 more weeks until you're legally mine." "I'm already yours," I breathed, surprising myself with the truth of it. His arms tightened around me. "Say that again." "I'm yours, Dominic." I turned in his lap so I could see his face, see the hunger and possession and something deeper in his dark eyes. "I was probably yours from that first night at the ball, even though I didn't want to admit it." "Chloe," he groaned, his control visibly fraying. "If you keep talking like that, I won't be able to wait 3 more weeks." "Then don't," I challenged, my own desire overriding my nervousness. "I don't need the wedding to make this real. It's already real." Something fierce and triumphant flashed across his face. "Are you sure?" In answer, I kissed him, pouring every ounce of want and trust and feeling I couldn't yet name into it. He responded immediately, standing with me in his arms and carrying me across the hall to his bedroom, the one I'd never entered. What followed was claiming and discovery and completion all at once. Dominic worshipped my body with a reverence that made me feel cherished, even as his possession made me feel owned. And when he finally made me his completely, the physical act sealing what had already been true emotionally, I understood why he'd insisted I was his from the beginning. Because he was right. I was his. And he was mine. Afterward, lying tangled in his sheets with his arms wrapped around me, I felt safe in a way I'd never experienced before. Not just physically safe, though Dominic's protection was absolute, but emotionally safe. Safe to be myself, to be vulnerable, to be powerful. "I love you," I whispered into the darkness, the words escaping before I could second-guess them. He went very still, then rolled to face me, his dark eyes intense even in the dim light. "What did you say?" "I love you," I repeated, more certain this time. "I know it's fast and probably crazy, but I do. I love you, Dominic Russo." His kiss was tender and fierce and absolutely devastating. "I've loved you since I saw you on that terrace," he confessed against my lips. "Watching you stand alone with such dignity, refusing to let them break you. I fell in love with your strength, Chloe, and every day since has only made me love you more." We made love again, slower this time, and I understood the difference between claiming and loving, between possession and partnership. Dominic was both, would always be both, but the foundation was love. The next morning, I woke in his bed for the first time to find him watching me with an expression that made my heart stutter. "Move your things in here," he said. "I don't want to spend another night without you." I agreed without hesitation, but our happiness was short-lived. That afternoon, while Dominic was in meetings and I was working in what had become our shared office, Marco appeared in the doorway, his expression grave. "Mrs. Russo," he said, using my future title. "We have a situation." My blood ran cold. "What kind of situation?" "Vincent Bennett was attacked an hour ago outside his office. He's alive but badly injured. He's asking for you." I was in the car within minutes, Dominic having been pulled from his meeting to accompany me. My father was in the hospital by the time we arrived, his face bruised and bandaged, but conscious. "Chloe," he said when I entered, his voice rough. "I need to tell you something. About your mother." "What about her?" I asked, taking his hand. "She didn't die in an accident," he said, and my world tilted. "She was killed. By Marcus Delacroix's father, as retaliation for me refusing a business deal. I've kept it secret for 16 years, but Marcus knows. And he's threatening to expose everything if you don't leave Russo and marry him." Rage, pure and incandescent, flooded through me. "He killed my mother?" "His father did," Vincent clarified. "But Marcus has known for years and said nothing. He's using it now as leverage." I looked at Dominic, whose expression had gone deadly cold. "He won't get away with this," Dominic promised. "None of them will." "What are you going to do?" I asked. His smile was terrifying. "I'm going to give you justice, my love, and then I'm going to make sure no one ever threatens you again." The revelation about my mother's death changed everything. The sorrow I'd carried for 16 years, believing she'd died in a senseless accident, transformed into focused rage. Marcus Delacroix's family had murdered her, and he'd known, had kept silent, and was now trying to use that knowledge to force me into marriage. It was monstrous, and it required a monstrous response. "We need evidence," I said to Dominic that night, my mind working through possibilities with a clarity born of fury. Proof that his father ordered the hit. Proof that Marcus knew and concealed it. Without evidence, it's just my father's word against theirs. "I have people working on it," Dominic assured me. "But Chloe, this is going to get ugly. The Delacroix family won't go down quietly." "Good," I said coldly. "I don't want quiet. I want them destroyed." Over the next week, Dominic's investigators uncovered a trail of evidence that painted a damning picture. Marcus's father had ordered my mother's death as punishment for Vincent's refusal to cede territory in a territorial dispute. The hit had been made to look like an accident, a car running a red light and striking her as she crossed the street. The driver had disappeared immediately afterward, paid off and relocated. And Marcus had known for at least 5 years, having discovered documents in his father's files after the old man's death. He'd kept silent, seeing the information as potential leverage. When I'd rejected his advances, when Dominic had claimed me, Marcus had decided to use his ace card. But he'd underestimated 2 things: Dominic's resources and my capacity for strategic vengeance. "I want to confront him," I told Dominic. "Face to face, with evidence in hand." "It's dangerous," he warned. "I don't care." My voice was steel. "He threatened to use my mother's murder as a bargaining chip. He needs to see that I'm not the scared bastard daughter anymore. I'm your wife, your partner, and I'm more dangerous than he ever imagined." Dominic's expression filled with fierce pride. "Then we'll do it together." We arranged a meeting at Neutral Territory, a restaurant owned by the Castellanos, who'd agreed to host in exchange for advance notice of what evidence we'd uncovered. Antonio Castellano had no love for the Delacroix and saw opportunity in their potential downfall. Marcus arrived with his father's old attorney, clearly expecting some kind of negotiation. His expression when he saw me sitting beside Dominic, files spread before us, was almost comical. "What is this?" he demanded. "This," I said calmly, "is the end of your family's power in this city. We have evidence that your father ordered my mother's murder 16 years ago. We have documentation of the payoffs, witness statements from people involved in covering it up, and most damningly, we have emails from you discussing this information with your attorney, debating how best to use it as leverage." Marcus's face went white. "You can't prove any of that." "We can prove all of it," Dominic said coldly. and we're prepared to release it to the district attorney unless you agree to our terms." "What terms?" Marcus's attorney asked, clearly calculating damage control. "The Delacroix family divests completely from all operations in this city," I said, having rehearsed this moment. "You sell your territories to families we designate at prices we determine. You publicly apologize for the murder of my mother and your attempted manipulation, and Marcus specifically agrees to never contact me or any member of my family again." "That's everything we have," Marcus protested. "You'd destroy us." "You destroyed my mother," I replied, my voice cutting. "This is mercy. The alternative is Dominic ensuring you meet the same fate she did." The threat hung in the air, and I saw Marcus finally understand the position he was in. Dominic Russo wasn't bound by the same rules of civility that had protected him before, and I wasn't the vulnerable bastard daughter anymore. I was a woman with power, protection, and a burning need for justice. "We'll agree to your terms," the attorney said finally, recognizing when his client was beaten. "Good," Dominic said. "You have 48 hours to begin the divestment process. Miss a single deadline, and the evidence goes public." As Marcus left, defeated and furious, I felt something settle inside me. Not quite peace. Nothing could bring my mother back. But closure. Justice, in the only form this world would recognize. "How do you feel?" Dominic asked once we were alone. "Powerful," I admitted. "Is that wrong? Should I feel guilty for destroying his family?" "They destroyed yours first," he said simply, "and you gave them an out. Death would have been justice in our world. You chose exile instead. That's mercy, not cruelty." The wedding took place 2 weeks later, a grand affair that brought together every major family in the city. I walked down the aisle in a gown that cost more than my mother had earned in her lifetime, toward a man who'd given me everything she'd been denied. Protection, respect, power. Vincent gave me away, tears in his eyes as he placed my hand in Dominic's. "Take care of her," he said quietly, the way I should have from the beginning. "Always," Dominic promised. The ceremony was traditional, the vows eternal, but the meaning was entirely our own. When Dominic kissed me as my husband for the first time, sealing our union before hundreds of witnesses, I felt the final pieces of my old life fall away. I was no longer Chloe Bennett, the bastard daughter, the embarrassment, the woman caught between worlds. I was Chloe Russo, queen beside a king, partner to the most powerful man in the city, architect of a new order where women like me could be valued for intelligence rather than just beauty. The reception was lavish, but my favorite moment came late in the evening, when the wives and daughters I'd been quietly empowering approached me together, a show of solidarity that didn't go unnoticed by their husbands. "You've given us hope," Gabriella said quietly, "shown us that we can be more than decorative. Thank you." "Thank yourselves," I replied. "You've had this power all along. I just helped you see it." That night, in the honeymoon suite of the hotel where we'd celebrate before flying to Italy in the morning, Dominic pulled me into his arms. "Do you have any regrets?" he asked. I thought about the question seriously. My life had changed so dramatically in just 2 months. I'd gone from isolated and scorned to powerful and protected. I'd found love with a man who'd claimed me possessively but treated me as an equal. I'd gotten justice for my mother and reshaped the world that had tried to break me. "None," I said honestly. "This is exactly where I'm meant to be." "With me," he said, not quite a question. "With you," I confirmed. "Building an empire together, protecting each other, loving each other." His kiss was thorough and claiming, a reminder that despite all the power I'd gained, I was still his. But the beauty was that he was equally mine. As we made love that night, Our first as husband and wife, I understood finally what it meant to be both possessed and free. Dominic owned me in the ways that mattered, my heart, my loyalty, my body, but he'd also freed me to be powerful in my own right. 6 months later, I stood in Dominic's office, now our office, reviewing reports from the network of women I'd built. They'd uncovered 3 major weaknesses in rival families' operations, information that had allowed us to expand our influence while appearing to do nothing at all. "You're terrifying," Dominic said admiringly, reading over my shoulder, "in the best possible way." "I learned from the best," I replied, turning to kiss him. "We should celebrate," he murmured against my lips. "I have news that I think you'll appreciate." "What news?" "The Delacroix family has completely divested from the city. Marcus has relocated to Europe, where he'll spend the rest of his life being irrelevant. Your mother's justice is complete." Tears pricked my eyes, but they were tears of relief rather than sorrow. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Dominic said seriously. "You did this, Chloe. You stood up for yourself, demanded justice, and wielded power with precision. All I did was provide resources. You did more than that," I argued. "You saw me when I was invisible. You claimed me when no one else would. You gave me the tools to become powerful in my own right, rather than just protecting me. Because you deserved it," he said simply, "and because a queen needs a throne, not just a crown." I kissed him deeply, passionately, grateful for this man who'd disrupted my life so completely and given me everything I'd never known I wanted. "I love you," I whispered. "I love you, my queen," he replied, "now and always." As we stood together in our office, planning the next phase of our empire, I realized that the scared woman who'd been humiliated at a charity ball just months ago had died. In her place was someone stronger, fiercer, more capable than I'd ever imagined being. Dominic had claimed me that night with a demand to dance, making men vanish with his mere presence. But what he'd really done was show me how to claim myself. And together, we'd built something unprecedented. An empire where power came not from blood or tradition, but from intelligence, strategy, and the courage to challenge every rule that said women like me didn't belong. I belonged. Beside Dominic, as his partner and equal. Ruling together over a world we were reshaping one bold decision at a time. And anyone who thought the bastard daughter wasn't worthy of a crown could watch as I wore one anyway, earned through strength rather than given through birth. This was my happy ending. Not rescue, but partnership. Not submission, but power. Not being claimed by a king, but becoming a queen in my own right. And it was perfect.